and I'll get the same work done as anybody who works a 9 to 5, then what does it matter as long as it gets done?
So first
Yeah.
of all, can you please briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Ryan. I am 26 years old. Yeah. Um, I am the founder of the Quarter Life Crisis podcast, and I finished my master's last year of June. Um, yeah, shall I just continue with the introduction into what it is, or?
Yeah, well, please, yeah, tell me what is it and what inspired you actually to start it.
Yeah. So basically, before I started my master, I had a company as well. It was called the Side Project. It was a music company in which I promoted upcoming producers on my YouTube channel. And that YouTube channel basically flopped to some extent. And as a result, I was super intrigued into figuring out why it didn't work. That made me start my master in content and media strategy, because what I was mainly doing was entirely content based. And so, in doing that research, from the stuff that I learned in the master, I researched um, why it didn't work in my company. And to make the long story short, it basically was because the needs of my target group did not align with what I wanted to share. The needs of the target group were 15, 16, 17-year-old boys usually who wanted a quick hack how to make a song like Martin Garrix. What I wanted to share was how do you find your sound and how do you be unique in an otherwise super saturated industry? And people didn't care about that. And then all of a sudden, that market quickly went downhill. Now, I always struggled to, as far as self belief, that I was talented enough to make it in the music industry, which is notoriously brutal industry to work in. Um, and as a result, that led me, as my master was coming to an end, to the problem of okay, I really love music. I know I don't necessarily want to work in a standard 9 to 5 where I don't really give a crap about what I'm doing. But it looks like music is not going to work out either. But what the hell am I then going to do with my life um, after the master is over? And after my bachelor, having worked there, um, sort of learning then that the 9 to 5 wasn't it either. Um, I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't necessarily know what I did want. And when speaking about that with friends at first, I realized I wasn't alone there. And um, yeah, then at some point, sort of a ball dropped for me, um, that I realized I was onto something. So then I also started speaking to people who weren't necessarily close friends, because obviously I felt like they would always resonate with you, right? There's usually the same kind of people. But also speaking to people who didn't and realized that even there they also had it. And some have it in different ways, um, as I did. But this quarter life crisis situation, this sort of um, postgraduate, I guess, depression, as you call it's very familiar to a lot of people. And then in doing more research on it, I basically realized that there wasn't a lot out there as far as books wise goes. And then I thought, why don't I, use my strengths in this case and network as well that I built up and just start a podcast on this topic. And that's what led to me launching the Core Life Crisis podcast, which is essentially just me doing research for a book that I eventually want to write on this topic.
That's amazing. Well, actually, do you already see what the podcast has brought in, like, to other graduates as well as to yourself in managing the postgraduate anxiety or the quarter life crisis?
Yeah. Um, so for me, what it's definitely brought is several reminders of, you have plenty of time. I think this issue, one of the main issues, at least that I see, is people think the first decision they make from a career point of perspective is final. And if you make the wrong mistake there, that you're, the rest of your life is crushed. And what is fascinating, after having speak to about 30 people by now, is that all of these people seem to go through that. And some, I've spoken to very mixed group, from people who started a business at 18 and then, got very successful in that company and working in it, and they're like, oh, I didn't have time for a quarter life crisis, but it could still happen. To people who tried to be acting, break through in acting for 10 years, but just couldn't make it, and all the ups and downs. And what is fascinating is that this crisis is kind of essential, because it tells you that, hey, something is wrong about this situation you are in, and you want it to change. If you would just accept it as is, and that is one of the hypotheses for the podcast as well, I think that's what leads to a lot of midlife crises, that you sort of just accept, okay, I need money. You start buying a bigger house because you think that'll make you happier. And then that, dopamine hits that doesn't last. And then you buy the next thing and you buy a car. And then at some point you're like halfway through your life, you're like, fuck, what am I, I'm super unhappy with what I'm doing. I don't know, maybe getting for guys usually, at least, a younger girlfriend is the solution, and for the others, for women, it's sometimes a younger boyfriend. Maybe it's more expensive. Mainly men that go through it, though. um, to realize that that is all, that's not going to make the difference either. Like, the problem is that the thing you spend 80% of your week on, you don't feel passionate about. You're just doing it because it gives you money. And as a result, this foundation that you need in order to be, to some extent, consistently happy is lacking. So as far as what I think, that is something that I learned basically from it myself is, hey, you have plenty of time. Take some time as well to figure it out. And of course, for me now, this podcast is ironically what I am passionate about. So that is an ironic byproduct. I think when I started, it was more interest. And as I've sort of grown in this, also realized this is now my thing. As far as what I think it's helped others, is getting them to understand that the rat race, or this golden cage that you create postgraduate, that's not it. And this thinking of that you need to take time to think about what you then do want. And I think it's good if it's already a starting point if you know what you don't want, right? There's also people who just switch off their feelings and sort of just be, but you also need to actively ask yourself what you then do want. So that's, I guess, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. But then, do you think, because you said there will be like, in a way, major implications for the future as well, if anxiety starts to develop after like post graduation, it can have like major effect on the future. Do you think in that case maybe it will be wise if people start to address it a bit earlier or be aware
Oh,
that
without a doubt.
it's coming?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think education fails us extremely hard. Education should prepare us much more for this post-dip depression, postgraduate depression. It's especially, it's people underestimate what a lifestyle change it is, right? Like, I mean, if I relate it to myself, I must say I lived a very lavish student life. But if you're going out 2 3 times a week with your best friends, the student life schedule is very, I wouldn't say flexible, but it's not like constant. You're not working 9 to 5. It's sort of free to plan in yourself. And then all of a sudden, you no longer see your friends during the week. You probably see them once or twice a month in the weekend if you're lucky. Um, you all of a sudden now have to be at an office from 9 to 5, which I have to say, remote work and stuff has improved that, but still, you
Mhm.
have to be at the office from 9 to 5 because someone says, that is when you have to be productive, instead of realizing, hey, maybe I should figure out when I'm productive. And if that is from 9 to 5, or from 6 in the evening to 1 in the morning, that should, in my opinion, be up to me. Um, and sort of this lifestyle change that you have to go through. I think it's completely logical that people have a dip. So if you then account as well on top that you don't actually like what you're doing, you're just sort of doing it because you need money, then I think it's completely understandable that you end up in this dip. So I think teachers fail us in education to not prepare us enough for that. But on top, I also think that the transition could be better as well. That people who are indeed entrepreneurs, I think, as you put it, should take that more into account to help you adjust to that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the transition because that's what I'm exactly like interested in for my research. Because I was wondering, what else do you think, in your opinion or from your experience, could be helpful for like postgraduates, or in this case, graduates going from academia to the workforce? Like what social enterprises can do for them apart from the
Yeah.
post, which I think already helps a lot.
So I'm not sure about the problem with the entrepreneurs is it's always a time issue, right? Like if you have, it also depends on the size that you are, but if you're like a one person company and that's your first hire or whatever, I'm not sure if you have the time to help people convert. um I would personally look it, for it more from education, that you say the standard bachelor is 4 years and you add a fifth year that is sort of an integration year onto that, that you say for 1 year more, you're no longer doing tests or any of that, but people are just helping you transition into that work life. People are trying to make you feel comfortable in that new situation. If you have questions regarding whatever you're working in, marketing or sales or finance, whatever relates to your study, that you can still, you have these confident teachers that you go to. I think that would be at least a much easier way to transition into that new approach. And obviously, I would, if entrepreneurs can afford the time, I would recommend that you do that together. So the entrepreneur understands where is it coming from. The teacher can recommend, or mentor, whatever you want to call that, can recommend, like, hey, this is what they learned. This is where they could improve. This is where they need to get used to. Um, but of course, the thing that I also just mentioned, that entrepreneurs could focus on being less old school. As said, don't tell me to come and work a 9 to 5 if my top peak productivity is 6 to 12. Let me work then, and I'll get the same work done as anybody who works a 9 to 5. Then what does it matter as long as it gets done, right? And of course, you need to account for meetings, overlap, sure, but set the meeting, and outside of that, let me do my thing. Uh, and yeah, don't feel like you need to control or something like that. Is that super old school approach that doesn't work for me there.
So you believe that there should be some sort of a mixture between the university and the companies as well. So students will be offered the opportunity to slowly, smoothly integrate, and there should be like more compromises on the side of companies in a way.
Yes, yeah, the less controlling, more sort of relaxed. um Also let realize that the person has to adjust. Don't just expect 100% from them right away. People also need time, especially when they come into new companies, to feel the mission, right? To understand the company, to really understand the way of thinking, the culture that is there. And people underestimate that part as well, like this transition period, I guess. There's not really any time for, especially in startups, by the way, which I've only worked in, so I don't know, maybe it's different in scale ups or like big companies, but especially in startups, there's no time for anything. Like also, even when you have HR conversations, it's always about targets and company orientated things instead of, hey, how are you doing,
Mhm.
how are you feeling with this. How is it, if you move to a new city, for that, how are you doing from a friend circle perspective.
Yeah.
I remember when I started at King in Amsterdam, I had no one there, which is ironic because now a massive friend group of mine lives there. When I was there, no one was there. But
Mhm.
then all of a sudden you're like, well, how the fuck do you grown-ups meet new people, to be honest? Because when, like, unless it's from work, otherwise how do you do it? And then I think that then adds into it. If you then feel lonely on top, you're like, work, I don't know if this is it, etc. It all sort of starts spiraling, right? And that's what then leads to that depression feeling. Yeah.
From what I hear, you mentioned a lot of times the time factor. To me, it sounds that from your point of view, it all leads down to the time pressure that postgraduates feel, and that is maybe one of the main causes of anxiety that they experience.
I know that that was the main issue for me, at least. And
Mhm,
I'm also someone who gets very agitated when people tell me what to do.
mhm,
I know that for some of my friends, that part actually works great for them, that they know when and where to be because they just have terrible time management skills themselves. So they're like, if I have to be there from then to then cool, then I know that's when I have to be present. Um, that's why it's hard to say. I think the most recurring factors that I see in the issues post graduating is either it's just the adjustment to that life because you don't really get prepared for it in that sense in school. That's what I actually afterwards. Do you know or the hospitality stream at Stendon? I
mhm.
kind of admired that approach because they get used to kind of that working life already, right? Over a course, it would be cool if you prepare sort of all these other studies, whatever it may be, in that way as well, rather than just okay, you know the theory, now go do it. And then on top of the theory, 90% of the time isn't even really relevant, like there just has to be a smoother transition into that. Um,
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, and actually, I learned a lot of new things, and you gave me like a ground for thinking, I would say. So thank you very much for that. I actually don't really have any further questions, but I would like to ask you if you have any questions for me or anything else that you would like to share. Maybe some future plans for the podcast, something exciting coming up that is not a secret, of course.
um, so we are working very hard on creating a email newsletter at the moment where
Mhm.
I connect purpose-driven businesses with students seeking purpose.
Okay.
Um, what I definitely learned from I learned the hard way from my own experiences what I didn't want and what I hope to do with this um, connection is bring the people, fascinating people that I interview and the companies they 90% of the time own. I want to bring that together with people who are like, I don't just want to work at a Amazon or whatever. I want to work for a company that actually makes a difference. And the
Mhm.
ironic thing is, there's a massive movement in our generation, right, of people who say, change and the richer and blah blah blah. I think in reality, if we all just said, I no longer work for an Amazon or I no longer work for the Deloittes and whatever of this world, all of a sudden you wouldn't have that problem because they don't have anybody that can work for them. So it's also partly up to ourselves to just say, okay, at the bare minimum, if I work for someone, I want to do something I believe in, I'm passionate for, and not just like I just don't believe you find that anymore working at Amazon. Maybe back in the day when it was starting out, but I don't believe that you can find that, right? That's my belief. I could be wrong, of course. So that's an interesting project I'm working on. But in order to build a decent newsletter community, that's quite tough. So that's something we'll be spending a lot of time on at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand. Well, good luck with it because it sounds like it's gonna have a lot of benefits for you and for a lot of students and a lot of graduates too. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, thank you for sharing it with me. Thank you so much, Ryan. Bye.
Okay.